One of the four values in the Agile Manifesto is responding to change over following a plan. But where does that leave us when it comes to deciding how to plan? And how much planning should we do? In our next talk, we'll hear about an effective planning methodology that enables answering hard questions from the business, but also changing direction when we need to. So join me in welcoming our next speaker, CTO and Principal Architect, Amanda Kabak.
Hi, thanks for the introduction and thanks everyone for joining me today. As it was mentioned, I'm Amanda Kabak. I work at Clean Spark, which is based in the United States. Thanks so much to CTO Craft for asking me to present here today. I think what they're doing here is incredibly beneficial to our industry. Planning's for the birds. Devil's in the details. Best laid plans. We've all heard the proverbs and the horror stories about plans going awry. At their best, they can still sometimes feel Sisyphean. And at their worst, they blow up before we even start them. So why plan? Well, we in technology are in a tight spot. We, as technical leaders, feel it most acutely. We get it from both sides. Lots of times the business doesn't trust us to be able to deliver, and the technologists don't trust them to not run after the next shiny thing. We're stuck in the middle of a cacophony of discontent. And unfortunately, we can't really blame anyone. Business is hard. Competition is fierce. Market pressures are real. And if they aren't successful, we don't have a job. At the same time, technology is hard. We're asked to build and support complicated, distributed, resilient applications with a multitude of clients, with an avalanche of shiny tools and technologies. We have to be able to both turn on a dime and deliver on time. But no matter how much some of us might just want to hide in the garage and tinker away, the truth is that we serve at the pleasure of the business. We have to facilitate the business's profitability to get a paycheck, even if we own the business, especially if we own the business. And businesses generally don't run on 2-week sprints. They've got contracts with hard deadlines. They've got competitors rolling things out that they have to beat. They've got conferences to plan for where they want to unveil certain features. All of the things that businesses need to do require forecasting and coordination and a solid sense of timing. Now, some of you may have seen the title of this talk and thought it was an oxymoron, or worse, that I'm advocating a return to the dark ages of waterfall. I'm not. But I do think that we threw the baby out with the bathwater in the rush to embrace agile methodologies. Agile elevates the idea of change to a first-class citizen in our world, which is good, because it is. But change itself is not a reason to jettison all planning. In fact, I've found that planning becomes more essential in the face of change, especially when plans aren't viewed as a static 500-page spec, but as living things that provide insight and visibility into the complicated activities we're trying to accomplish. Effective planning is a skill. When you do it right, it's mechanical and repeatable, just like other engineering tasks. And the more you do it, the quicker it gets. Now, nothing I'm going to present here is new. This type of planning has been used in many different industries for decades. And I'm also not advocating this planning to be used on every single type of project. If a project is only 1 or 2 people or a handful of weeks long, this is going to be overkill. In every other situation, though, I've found that the upfront effort pays back in dividends. So how do we do this? Well, first we start with a different type of task granularity. Let's say you're planning a vacation. I mean, aren't we all fantasizing about traveling again? Well, when you're planning a vacation, you've got several different layers of granularities of tasks that you're looking at. What's the overall duration of the vacation? How much time do I have to take off of work? Do you need to make flight reservations? Is it a single round trip, or are you going multiple stops during your time off? And then hotel reservations. Maybe you're only doing one flight, but part of the time you're spending in the city and part of the time you're spending in the mountains. And then activities. Some of these might be multi-day and some of them might just be an afternoon. And at the most granular, your meals. You need to make some reservations, maybe at some famous restaurants. But then when you get into the vacation, you refine day by day, sometimes hour by hour. What's the weather look like? How am I feeling? Do I just want to relax and read a book? So this is the difference between planning and execution. When you're planning, we want to keep things at a course level of granularity. Plan in 1 week increments. Group implementation tasks together that are related. This facilitates a sane number of tasks to juggle. It allows developers to focus on related tasks for days or even weeks at a time. And we all know developers love to focus, they want to get in the flow. And it keeps us from tying discrete tasks to detailed requirements, which will change. And it also satisfies the law of big numbers. Now, what's the law of big numbers? Well, technically, it says that in a sufficiently large set of items, the average of a subset is going to converge to the average of the full set. In plain English, it means things come out in the wash. If you overestimate some tasks, you'll probably underestimate other tasks. And with enough tasks, it'll average out. Well, I mean, now I said the dirty word, estimate. I mean, we've all been burned, mostly by underestimation, either through optimism or naivete or just missing things when you're, put on a spot to give it a number of hours or days. Well, there are things we can do to reduce the uncertainty and unknowns in trying to get to accurate estimates. For larger unknowns, plan a proof of concept. Actually plan time to do the proof of concept, to do the research that's required. Or pull more people in to your estimation process. Someone might know a shortcut. Someone else might have done something similar at a previous job and knows that it's more complicated than you think it is. If you're really stuck, ask someone for an order of magnitude. Is this days, weeks, or months? And then when they feel comfortable saying days, weeks, or month, dig in a little more. Is it 1, 2, or 4 days? Is it 1, 2, or 4 weeks? With these techniques, you'll end up coming up with decent estimates, and with enough tasks, you're not totally in a disaster area if you underestimate something. So not only do you have to identify the tasks, and not only are the tasks coding tasks, but you have to know how the tasks depend on each other. This takes brainstorming and iteration. First, what are the tasks? If it's not just construction, it's also requirements, design, testing, reviews, releases, documentation. And then the dependencies. You will 100% miss things the first time through. You'll miss a lot of things the first time through. It's one of those activities where you have to put some time in and then walk away and come back and think of more things. So now you've got all of these tasks and all of their dependencies. How do you organize them? How do you see through this list of things that you have? Well, you might hate to hear it, but Microsoft Project is what I use, and I hate it. But it's like a cantankerous grandmother. She drives you up the wall, but she knows everything, and she doesn't sugarcoat it. She tells it like it is. It really is the best tool for this job. You need to be able to visualize the network that your tasks and their dependencies make up. You need to find those dangling modifiers. You need to have something else calculate the effects of your dependencies and show you the critical path. The critical what? Critical path. Now, technically, the critical path means it's the string of tasks that take the longest to complete in your project. Other way to look at it is the string of tasks that have no float between them. Now, what's float? Well, float is how much room a task has to be late before it delays the task that's after it and or delays the full completion date of the project. Just getting to the point of understanding your critical path is invaluable because it shows you the shortest duration your project can be. And now you lay that against the expectations that the business has set, and you know if they're reasonable or not. Before you do one line of code, you know if you're going to be able to be successful or not. And you have information to have a conversation with the business about it. These are incredibly valuable insights with real minimum amount of work compared to the duration of the project. So in typical Scrum teams, we have a static set of people that we flow tasks across. Ideally, they're generalizing specialists. But we all know that teams are made up of individuals, and individuals have their own strengths and weaknesses. And each project doesn't consist of a steady stream of tasks that will always suit the team's actual makeup. We can easily have people sitting idle or tasks stranded, half finished. We might have someone assigned to something they're really not great at or don't like to do just because it was the next task on board. This leads to waste and inefficiencies. On the flip side, task assignment in a project plan is something you do with intention and forethought. And you can take availability and resource constraints and expertise into account up front and not get stymied down the road. So think of the critical path again, the path where if something's late, the project is late. You want to be careful to put your most seasoned people on the critical path tasks to give your project the greatest chance of success. You don't want your newest, most junior hire on those tasks. Now, unless you're at a unicorn, which has its own problems, you're constantly going to be asked to do more with less. For most of the last decade, I've worked at resource constrained startups where I was chief cook and bottle washer and had to figure out a way to run the most efficient process possible without sacrificing quality. Planning is the only way to do it. Being able to plot out your tasks and dependencies and manipulate those tasks by moving them around within the limits of their floats provides insight into the bare minimum of resources you need to get the job done and shows you what happens to the project when you don't have those resources. It facilitates conversations with the business about resource and timing. Now, if your calendar is anything like mine, you've got days with back to back to back to back to back to back meetings. And on those days when things go bad, the badness just cascades. The first meeting runs over, so the second one starts late, and now you've got this chain reaction of disaster. Well, one way you could fix it is to make the meetings a little longer. But then we encounter Parkinson's law, which says that the amount of work expands to fill the time available for its completion. Longer meetings will take longer to get through. Overestimated tasks will lead to developer gold plating. The other solution is to schedule room between your tasks. Schedule time. This is exactly what float is to a project. If a task or a meeting runs long, it consumes float instead of pushing out the next task. Float corresponds to risk. The less float you have in a project, the riskier the project is going to be, the more fragile it's going to be. Now, luckily, float is a number. So lots of risk can be calculated, it can be quantified. So you can compare one plan to another plan and see what's riskier and what's not riskier. You can try things in the plan to reduce your risk. So I won't go into the methods of quantification. You can find those in the book Writing Software by Yuval Lowy. But it provides incredible insight into each plan. And once you start talking risk to a business, they eat it up. They have never heard that before from a technical team, and once you introduce it, they never want to live without it. It's an incredibly powerful tool. Now, and again, there are risks to a project that can't easily be quantified. How experienced is your team? How much resource leakage do you have to production support? How baked are the requirements? How much management and oversight do you have? These are all things you need to take into account when putting your plan together and qualify whether you think you can execute on it or not. And this is partly where the project network comes into play. This is a network diagram of a project that I was supposed to build at one of my startups. Now, I took one look at this plan, which has parallel critical paths and then a whole bunch of additional parallelism underneath that. And I said, nope, no way, no how. We are not seasoned enough to be able to deliver on this plan. It's too complicated. And I could make that decision before we even started. Go back to the drawing board and find a different way to execute what the business wanted. It's incredibly valuable to be able to do that. What I'm really talking about with planning is business partnership. Now, transparency and visibility and partnership with the business starts well before construction. It's not just a burn down chart. You need to give options of how to deliver things. You need to facilitate stage deliveries and milestones. You need to be efficient with your resources. You have to be mindful in order to accomplish all of that. And planning is easy. The excuses not to do it really don't hold water. It doesn't take long compared to the duration of the project that you're planning and the amount of money and resources you're going to pour into it. Just because it changes doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It provides insight into the cost of changes. It facilitates conversations with the business about when they want to make those changes, what is going to be sacrificed, what is possible and what is not possible. The only true agility is business agility. We need to be able to facilitate the business's objectives. And we need to be able to do that with upfront and frank conversations about what's possible. So change requires planning to be able to respond to it properly and to be able to help your business be successful. So thanks again for joining me today, and thanks for CTO Craft for having me. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.